the Substance Control Act. And under this legislation, anabolic steroids are defined as any drug or hormonal substance chemically related to testosterone, other estrogens, progestins, and other hormones that promotes muscle growth. So the act was formally brought to the House in 1990 before it went into full effect in 1991, which I previously just covered. But according to Congress, Anabolic Steroids Control Act of 1990 amends the Controlled Substances Act to 1. Establish penalties for physical trainers or advisors who endeavor to persuade or induce individuals to possess or use anabolic steroids. So this has gotten a lot of physical trainers in trouble because they have been giving athletes anabolic steroids. 2. Add anabolic steroids as a Schedule 3 substance under this act. And 3. Define anabolic steroids as any drug or hormonal substance that promotes muscle growth in the manner similar to testosterone, including specified substances. So this is just kind of a blueprint of how legislation follows and governs the Controlled Substances Act that has to do with anabolic steroids. So once people go to court, they look at this law, were they guilty or not guilty, and then the determination is up to the judge. So let's look at some examples of athletes that are notorious for anabolic steroids. So let's look at Lance Armstrong first. I know when I was a kid, Lance Armstrong was all over the news for steroids, and at the time I had no idea what they even were. So the issue was people became suspicious when Lance won multiple athletic competitions after his cancer diagnosis. So somehow he won the 2006 Tour de France as he was diagnosed with cancer, which did not make much sense. But according to ESPN, his competitor, American cyclist Floyd Landis, who was Armstrong's teammate for 2 years, admits that he used performance-enhancing drugs. They had some emails about it. They confiscated the emails. But basically, he admitted to doping and kind of brought Lance down with him. And he denies the allegation. Lance eventually just denied the allegation. But the story did not end there. Armstrong announced his retirement from competitive cycling afterwards at the age of 39 to focus on his cancer foundation, which in my opinion was more of a philanthropic effort to take the limelight away from the anabolic steroid accusation. Because in 2012, federal prosecutors dropped their criminal investigation against Armstrong and the U.S. Postal Service team in February, which they had to do with. They were on the U.S. Postal Service team, and they had no charges filed. However, the anti-doping agency still accuses Armstrong of doping and trafficking the drugs in June, and trafficking is a whole nother issue that my discussion does not necessarily go over, but the consequences are larger and can be more intense. In October, the USADA formally charged Lance using, possessing, and trafficking banned substances and recommends a lifetime ban. So basically, Lance lost everything, and the verdict of this situation was Lance was stripped of everything, all of his achievements from August 1998 and onward. And because he chose not to appeal the allegations, he was found guilty under the Anabolic Steroids Control Act. So Dwayne Chambers was a runner and Olympian, and he was Britain's highest earning male athlete that was stripped of everything when he tested positive for THG, which is just another testosterone building substance. So this is kind of interesting topic. So in the United States, we have the Substance Control Act, but in Britain, they do things a little differently, which I will go over. Under the British Olympic Association rules, he was stripped permanently from competing in the British Olympics, and Adidas then took away all of his contracts. The World Anti-Doping Agency, who we actually just saw accuse Lance, held the primary responsible to determine if Dwayne could still participate, but they chose to ban him according to the British Anabolic Steroids Class C Substances Act under the Misuse of Drugs Act. So we have Schedule 3, which classifies anabolic steroids as a controlled substance. In Britain, they do things a little differently. they have the British Anabolic Steroids Act, and then Class C substances under the Misuse of Drugs Act. So basically the same thing, just a little title differentiation. Mark McGwire, who was not even able to be put, I think that they actually stripped him from the Hall of Fame after they found out that he used anabolic steroids, but Mark is a little bit different because at the time the Anabolic Controlled Substances Act was not even in place, so he was able to get away with a lot more. McGwire is one of the best baseball players of all time, but lost it all due to steroids. In a congressional hearing, he denied the use of drugs in 2005. But according to the New York Times, Mr. McGwire was among 10 other players and baseball executives who spoke under oath in an 11-hour hearing of the House Committee on Government Reform, which is trying to pressure baseball to toughen its policy against steroids. So going back to the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned how the MLB is notorious for controlled substances, specifically anabolic steroids. McGwire actually came clean after his career was over, so there was no need for the MLB to suspend him or take him to court for violating the Substance Control Act, but he was banned from the NFL and Olympics later on. And a senator here in the U.S. capped his 20-month investigation into steroids in baseball, and then they actually called out 89 major league players for allegedly using steroids, and Mark McGwire was one of them. Continued on this topic, I dug into a little bit of research behind what was going on here, and they actually found steroids in Mark McGwire's locker. However, at the time, most steroids and performance-enhancing drugs were not banned by the MLB. 4 years later, in 2002, a federal investigation of the Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative, also known as BALCO, began. BALCO was a company that created a designer steroid, THG, which was at the time undetectable in any urine sample or blood test. So that's what really all of these athletes were going for. And there's no way that they could have accused someone of taking a steroid that they couldn't find on a test. Jose Canseco auditioned to be part of an MLB team in Mexico, but was quickly banned after refusing to submit to a drug test. Because drug testing falls under the MLB policy, it still strictly aligns with the Anabolic Steroids Control Act of 1990. After he was banned, after his career was over, Canseco wrote a book admitting to his usage and termination. And this book is called Juice. I'm sure you can find it on Amazon or whatever. But now he says that he actually regrets writing the book because he admitted to so much wrongdoing. So in sum, the Anabolic Steroids Control Act is abided by in all leagues that ban steroids. This act is the reason why these sports leagues are able to look for an unfair advantage of athletes using steroids. But this act falls under the Controlled Substances Act, which includes all other controlled substances like harsh drugs that are often misused. Because of this act, leagues are able to terminate contracts once players admit to misuse or are found guilty under Section 3 of the Controlled Substances Act. Sports leagues govern the use of controlled substances by administering urine tests to players in order to detect misuse of anabolic steroids. I have my works cited page here. I have a lot of great sources. So in sum, every player that I have mentioned has been terminated by the MLB or taken to court afterwards because Schedule 3 of the Substance Control Act came into effect. So going back to my argument that if a athlete is found or detected to have been using anabolic steroids, it should be treated like any musician, actress, person on the street that gets accused of any controlled substance, whether that's a narcotic, a hallucinogen, meth, cocaine, party drugs. I believe my argument is valid and is really backed up that any athlete that is found guilty of using anabolic steroids should be terminated from the team and should reap the consequences. Thank you.